Hello, bonjour, welcome back to Montreal by night. So, I did a test yesterday and it worked out quite well, so I'm gonna keep on practicing. And I was kind of motivated, even if it's not even 8 a.m., to actually go back into it right now. So, I'm gonna go back to where I left it yesterday and I'm gonna do, I don't know if I'm gonna do the whole chapter 2, but we'll see how it goes. I'll do an hour again, see how that flies. Hmm. Actually, yeah, we'll see. So, chapter 2, History of Blood. Oops. And know this, for though I remember the day when I could count you as a friend, we are now dead to one another. Oh my gosh. I do not claim the fair city of Montreal for the Sabbath. It was always, it has always been such. I do not forswear my duties to defend her, quite the contrary. She is more important now than ever, and I will be thrice damned before I watch the Camilla sully her visage. Remember this. Infringe upon this territory, and I will show you the reason why she is called the City of Black Miracles. The quiet city of Montreal shall remain quiet, no more. Except from a letter sent by Archbishop Strathcona to Prince Mitras of London on April 5th, 1838. Religion and culture are the basis of Montreal's past, despite rumors of a political foundation, whereas Christianity was once given magnificent form in the city's multitude of church spires. Foreign ideology and beliefs have since taken root in the blood-stained soil, with the integration of Islam, Buddhism, Taoism, Shintoism, animism, Judaism, and 100 other isms. Montreal has become a cultural miasma, and that's why we love it. This chapter details the history of Montreal and the surrounding lands. Some account is given of mundane historical events, but primarily to provide a context for the tribulation of the Sabbath. Each era of the city's history begins with a description of the period's mundane events. The catalyst. In the 16th century, the Americas were still an enigma and perceived by many as either a road to the Far East or a place as rich as the fabled Orient. Regardless, the Americas were considered ripe for plunder. One of the many explorers of this time was Jacques Cartier, a French navigator credited with bringing his country honor and the wealth of the New World. On October 2nd, 1535, in what was his second voyage to the region, Cartier landed in a magnificent land. He named it Mont Royal, and it would become known as the island of Montreal. The island was not revisited until the arrival of Samuel. Whoa, not that much. Samuel Champlain 70 years later. Champlain appreciated Montreal's strategic position on the St. Lawrence River and established a settlement on the island. As European explorers set out to claim portions of the New World, France was in the trip of toreador debauchery. and many vampires began to tire of their games. Europe was a hostile place, and biding power was a gamble that few could risk. Many disfranchised groups sent scouts to accompany the galleons that traversed the Atlantic. They hoped to escape the ancient Cainite aristocracy that ruled Europe. Cartier's vessel, the Merion, was accompanied by two damsels, Louis Drapeau, a French gangrel anti-tribu, scout who represented the interest of various Sabbath covens, and a mortal infernalist named Terence de Bouville. The journey proved to be a great success. Montreal was discovered. Drapeau prepared the island for the coming of the Cainite siblings, knowing that the elitist French toreador would never leave their ostentatious home, let alone consider making the transatlantic journey. Montreal stood ready to be claimed by the Sabbath. Unbeknownst to Drapeau, de Bouville pursued the interests of Metathiax. Do you say the CH or Metathiax? One of 36 demons in the order of the Cani. Creatures who battled in disease. Indeed, Terence was Metathiax's host body in the mortal world, and was responsible for consecrating unholy ground atop the island's mountain. The native Hochelaga Hurons, defenders of the island, fought against the spirit of Metathiax after Cartier departed. They lost. Plagues wiped out the village of Hochelaga, but the natives' final sacrifice trapped the demon on the island. The remainder of the century proved difficult for the French Sabbath, as they had to move slowly if they were to make their escape from the continent undetected. They needed a cover for their mass exodus, and the opportunity did not present itself until Champlain departed for the New World. The Ville-Marie Colony. Montreal proved to be a literal godsend for those of the Christian faith. Recollet missionaries busied themselves with the evangelization of the native, and the Jesuit joins the endeavor in 1632. News of the beautiful and bountiful land reached France through the Jesuit relation, a religious journal from Quebec, which proved to be one of the many inspirations for the settlements of the Ville-Marie Colony. Founded as the home for an order of hospital nuns, and funded primarily through the donation of money and land parcels, the Ville-Marie Colony was established on May 17th, 1642. Despite the growing Iroquois threat. In fact, the conflict growing between the native and traders almost aborted the settlement. The French king announced that he was ready to abandon New France because of its increasing hostilities. Louis Drapeau, who had first accompanied Cartier to the New World, lived in the Montreal region when Champlain expedition arrived. It was Drapeau's job to induct arriving Sabbath, but the means by which to bring them to the New World eluded him. The solution he came to was made even more rewarding by its irony. Most of France's elite. This fucking I, we never know how to say it. Engine and Jean, there's always like a different twist. I would say elite in French, but yeah, this is not French. Most of France's elite, especially those controlled by the hedonistic toreador, did not fancy the notion of moving to a place bereft of civilization's luxury. Faithful Catholics were another matter entirely. The Sabbat, acting on the advice of the L'Assemblée, discovered a multitude of Catholics eager to explore the new land, to spread the word of Christ. The Sabbat accompanied those explorers, posing as religious missionaries and devout colonists. The plan was a success. With the arrival of the Récollets and Jesuit missionaries, the first of the French Sabbat, primarily L'Assemblée and Gangrel Antitribu, set foot on new France. Meanwhile, Louis Drapeau began using the Jesuit relations to send secret messages back to France's Sabbat. With the aid of missionaries, colonists of Ville-Marie, and military forces sent to protect the fledgling colony, close to a dozen Sabbat escaped to the New World, while most immediately moved on from the colony, preferring the largely unexplored interior of Canada. A few, like Louis. What the fuck is Louis? Oh yeah, Louis. A few, like Louis, remained to help other new arrivals. When the Ville-Marie Colony expanded beyond the original fortress, more Sabbat fled across the Atlantic. Louis became the coven leader of the Ville-Marie Sabbat, who called themselves les Acadiens, the Acadians. First losses. War broke out in the New World over its fur trade. Relations between European competitors had already been volatile because the Huron and Algonquin tribes allied themselves with the French. In response, the Dutch in New Amsterdam, the future city of New York City, the future site of New York City, supplied Iroquois tribes with muskets to use against the French. Subjected to sporadic raids and assaults over the following decades, Ville-Marie came to rely on the strength of Maisonneuve, Jeanne-Mance, Le Moyne, Clos, and many other natives' comrades to defend its wall. Yet, despite continued Iroquois aggression and the brutal massacre of 30,000 Huron allies, Ville-Marie emerged from the conflicts almost completely unscattered. No longer encumbered by Europe's camarilla, the Sabbat acted on their predatory whims. They stole into native villages, skinned adults, and fed on children. It did not take long for the Iroquois to retaliate in significant number. They attacked the most obvious target, Ville-Marie. The Sabbat were at a disadvantage. The first attack came in June of 1643, when a group of settlers toiling outside the fort was ambushed by an Iroquois war party. What frightened the Sabbat was not the attack itself, but the fact that it happened during the day while they slept. 5 Sabbat left Ville-Marie that night to stage a counterattack that would hopefully prevent the Iroquois from approaching the colony again. It was a mistake. The Iroquois were prepared and outnumbered their opponent. Not even disciplines could save the Sabbat from being overwhelmed. Almost all les Acadiens, including Louis Drapeau, were dragged down and torn limb from limb, leaving the French colony under the care of only one Sabbat, a chimiché. I still don't know how to say that because in French I say it differently than in English. A chimiché, named Connaught, and his Bratovich attendants. When reinforcements finally arrived, not even Connaught School remained. He sacrificed them to buy himself time, forcing them to scour the forest and preoccupy the native while he prepared thaumaturgical rituals to protect himself. During Sunday Mass, however, his words were undone by an unexpectedly potent surge of faith, and he had to rework his art on the following nights. Camarilla Intercession, dedicated to Saint Joseph, New France's first hospital, La Maison de Mademoiselle Mance, was built in 1645. It was also used to house newly arrived hospital nuns and suspicions from France. Despite frictions among the colonists, the leader of New France, a French King Louis XIV, people took up residence outside the original fort in 1648. In 1653, in the midst of particularly brutal conflicts with the Iroquois, Montreal was blessed with the arrival of over 100 skilled laborers who helped expand the colony. By 1663, the suspicions took control of Montreal Island, which was followed by the arrival of Francis Carignan Regiment. The military force was responsible for building more forts and launching an initiative against the Iroquois that brought 20 years of peace to the region. Events conspired against the Sabbat of Ville-Marie in the mid-17th century. Despite the lack of hard evidence, Camarilla authorities in France began to suspect wrongdoing in the Americas. Reports of torture and rumors of children being mutilated into living mounds of bones and flesh were no longer attributed to the Iroquois. A subsequent investigation revealed the possibility of unapproved emigration to New France. The Toreador quickly clamped down by establishing control over the area and placing ponds in key position. Relations between colonists and the bureaucracy of Quebec soured. The Société de Notre-Dame de Montréal, a group of investigators in France that sponsored the Ville-Marie colonists, was initially used by the Sabbat as a cover for their flight west. As the Toreadors investigations of the colony continued, the Sabbat pulled out of the Société de Notre-Dame and searched for alternate routes to Montreal. The religious order still seemed to be the best adventure. Control of the island was eventually moved out of the hands of Société members and placed in the care of the religious suspicions, who would be the Sabbat's new next pawn. However, the Camarilla was ready for this move. I'll have to look into the suspicion because I believe it's related to Saint-Sulpice. So I'll have to double check what that is because the name rings a bell, but I can't remember if it's from France or from Montreal that I know it. Saint-Sulpice. I think there's a village close to where I come from that is called Saint-Sulpice. But because of that link, I would need to actually research that to dig deeper, The ongoing war with the Iroquois was hurting the Sabbat. By 1660, close to 20 Cainites had been killed, and there was no signs of peace. These facility, these fatalities inspired the recording of the Sabbaths Liber now we're having Latin, of Sabbaths Liber defuc, the fuck, defectorum, a kind of ledger of those who had been killed, similar to the Ville-Marie mortal account of those who died creating and defending the colony. The Liber Defectorum, it's probably not the way you should be saying it, but because it's the fuck, I like to say it Defectorum. um, set the precedent for the litany of blood that followed. With the transfer of Montreal Island to the Sulpician, there's no S there. I'm putting S's everywhere. I know, it's my list, but I have an issue with the further, like, ugh. Anyway, with the transfer of Montreal Island to the Sulpicians, the Toreador immediately sent in the Carignan regiments. It's kind of weird to switch from English to French when you have like French name, and I don't know how I would say that in English. Carignan regiments. So if I say the Carignan regiments, it's like I have to say Carignan in French, but then I have to say regiments in English. So that switch the speech pattern from one word to another, especially when they're kind of similar. Carignan regiments, it's kind of a bit tricky. It's a tongue twister. Ooh, twisted. Sent in the Carignan regiments to safeguard the colonists. The army's repeal purpose was to establish a Camarilla hegemony over the region. The Sabbat reacted with hostility, as evidenced by the growing agitation between French authorities and settlers. Camarilla spies began tracking down suspected agents of the Sabbat, torturing them to induce false confession and eliminating completely innocent families. The atrocities were again blamed on the native tribes. There's always a scapegoat, isn't it? When the military initiated its offensive against the Iroquois, the Sabbat dominated the settlers known as the Capot Bleu, the Blue Hoods. And yeah, in French, we have a speech pattern that we struggle to overcome. It's the H. Like, we don't say the H's really well. So, on top of the lisp, that's another thing that French people from France struggle with. So, yeah, the Blue Hoods, to misdirect the armies all over the New York countryside. It was only when it occurred to the Sabbat to use the French army against the warring tribes that the Iroquois were defeated. In 1667, a peace treaty was implemented, although the Camarilla maintained a presence in Ville-Marie. The Sabbat remained rooted in the colony and was more in control than the Toreador would ever admit. Indeed, the Sabbat was now 2 packs strong with les Acadiens et les Capots Bleus. And les Acadiens and les Capots Bleus. This is fun, but this is tricky, especially for me. The City of Black Miracles. Iroquois incursion resurfaced during the late 1680s and continued until the Peace Accord of 1701. The War of the League of Habsburg in Europe was echoed throughout the colonies as England and France came to blows. This was only one of many wars that threatened the fledgling settlement. Montreal itself was graced with favorable luck, though escaping occupation during both the War of the League of Habsburg and the War of Spanish Succession. In an attack that was blamed on the Iroquois, les Capos Bleus, disguised as native, wiped out over 24 settlers during a blood feast in the area of Lachine. Body parts were left dangling from trees, and several adults were forced to gorge on blood before they were drained. Wow. This period also saw the emergence of two new covens, Les Misérables, the vile ones, and the shepherds of Cain. Cain. It was also during this period, that Montreal Sabbath began to notice unusual events that would later be termed collectively the unknown. The incidents, ranging from missing kinites to failed creation rites and mysterious attacks all resulted from the trap demon Metathiac's growing power. The shepherds, having proven to be a potent coven, sent their missionaries to other North American cities. Many returned with the genealogical information and histories of other packs, coupled with Montreal's own Liber Defectorum. In 1740, the Litany of Blood was born. Okay, so that's the original. It's when the shepherds sent missionaries and then they came back. That migration back to Montreal was what started the Litany of Blood. During the War of the League sorry, let's start again. From the top. During the War of the League of Augsburg, the expedition launched against Montreal by the English was abandoned following an outbreak of chickenpox. In the War of Spanish Succession, the British were forced to withdraw twice. Once due to a shortage of ships, and a second time when 8 large transport vessels sank, drowning 1,500 troops. In the last incident, many Sabbats scored the submerged wreck and stole souvenirs and bodies. Okay. When I speak too much, my throat starts to gritch too much. It's kind of annoying. British conquest. After close calls in 2 wars, Montreal's luck finally ran out. Montreal's luck finally ran out during the 7-Year War. Having suffered through winter famine and other hardships, the city was inadequately protected when 3 British armies converged on it. Montreal surrendered in the face of superior forces. On September 8, 1760, New France capitulated to the British and became an English colony. 3 years later, at the end of the 7-Year War, the Treaty of Paris was signed, and all of France's holding in Canada was ceded to Great Britain. Camarilla rule over New France was a sham. The debauchery that made Paris so infamous spread to its colonies and threatened to weaken Camarilla holdings in various cities. But what the Camarilla didn't realize was the severity of the situation. The toreadors who ruled Montreal were mere figureheads, and they knew it. They spent most of their time engaging in frivolous social escapades in the mansions of Château de Vaudreuil and Château de Ramsay, and in the home of Madame Bégon. The centers of Montreal's socialite community, these 3 homes served as feeding grounds for the toreador and as places to engage in variety of wild games, while Kamaila Kindred watched. Mortals were encouraged and dominated to rape slaves and participate in orgies and duels to the death. Montreal eventually became a drain on clan asset, but European toreador had no way of severing ties with the region without losing their high standing in the Camarilla. During the 7 Years' War, when New France was close to being lost, Montreal's toreador fled to Paris, leaving the city to the British. The consequences of their action were not realized until much later. Montreal was left with a power vacuum, and the closest British Camarilla members were in Boston. The Sabbath seized the opportunity and annihilated all remnants of Camarilla presence on the island. The city was under their quiet control by the time the British claimed it, and more Camarilla vampires were sent in. Though outnumbered by new Camarilla forces and British troops, the Sabbath could not be rooted out of the city. While the Sabbath infested New France remained a weighty Camarilla issue, the toreador believed they no longer needed to deal with it and did little to assist the new Camarilla regime in Montreal. The fate of Canada was ratified under the Treaty of Paris. Montreal, now a British colony, became primarily a Ventrue concern. Oh, so Ventrues are British and toreadors are French? That kind of would make sense. But yeah, okay. Huh. Of course, like it's a generalization, but that would make sense. Oh my gosh. Under British occupation, New France was divided into three districts: Montreal, Quebec, and Trois-Rivières. Following the Treaty of Paris in 1763, this was amended and the three districts were brought together. The Sulpicians were forced to assume British nationality in order to maintain their ownership of the island. They had been regarded with some suspicion. The Sulpicians were regarded with suspicion, following accusation that they. I like the transition. It's kind of cool. I wish it would be a bit smoother, but I'm just doing with whatever I got. So deal with it. May have exhumed the grave of British soldiers, but the matter was dropped after 23 of the Sulpicians became British subjects. Control of the island was transferred from the seminary in Paris to the one in Montreal. The Ventrue appointed Kyle Strathcona as Prince of Montreal under the regency of Alexander Berishar. Governor of Quebec. It was hoped that Strathcona, a Scot, would be well received in Montreal, since French and Scots soldiers had already fought together on several occasions. The Ventrue were mistaken in believing that the sense of history shared by mortals would mean anything to the Sabbath. Strathcona did remember much of his mortal history as a Scot. He had helped the French fight the British while he cooperated with his Camarilla superiors. He bore many deep-seated grievances against the British and their many Ventrue supporters. The Sabbath shepherds sensed Strathcona's anger and thought of betrayal and chose to cultivate those qualities in him. They initially approached the prince in secret without divulging their true allegiance. Many years passed before they finally revealed themselves to him. Montreal, City of Faith. After British occupation, Catholicism wasn't the only widely practiced religion of Montreal. The English brought their Protestant belief with them, and this opened the door to a number of other denominations. The Anglicans met in the Recollet Church in 1761, and the Presbyterians opened their own church in 1792. A Methodist church was completed in 1821, followed by a Congregational church in 1833. There's so fucking many different brandings of Christianism. It's fucking nuts. I don't understand how they're all like, ooh, we're good Christians. Which one? You all believe in different shit. It's like cryptocurrency. You all build your own, and then you're like, but it's all blockchain. So why do you call it different things? You just want to have control on something, and therefore you're like, oh, but we're different. We're a different brand. Like just in like 3 sentences, there's like 12 of them. Fuck off. This is not religion. This is just stupidity. You don't believe in the same shit, and then you make believe that anyone that is not Christian is the bad guy, but you all kind of subdivide yourself anyway. Just pathetic. Look, now we have the Unitarians. Fuck that. A Methodist church was completed in 1821, followed by a Congregational church in 1833, while the Baptists arrived as early as 1820. The Unitarians struggled to open a house of worship, didn't succeed until 1841. Like just these 3 sentences, like I'm saying, there's like 12 different brands of Christianism. What the fuck? Montreal, but it's perfect for me, as it's what I'm kind of talking about Christianism, Montreal, languages. It's like, it's perfect. It's just that I don't really want to be an expert in fucking theology. Ugh. Montreal has become home to North America's first Young Men's Christians Association and a Jewish synagogue in 1777. In 1831, Lower Canada, which included Montreal, was the first colony in the British Empire to bestow full political freedom to the Jewish people. Okay? Sorry. The Sabbath was astonished to discover that the various denominational churches and temples that dotted Montreal did not dilute its faith. No, well, they're all trying to kind of build up their own tiny power, but it's disgusting. To the contrary, varied and sometimes conflicting beliefs somehow enhance the potency of faith on the island. Well, yeah, because they're like even more fervent. Oh, mine is the real one! Shut the fuck up. None of you is the real one. You're all delusional based on the imaginary, and you use the symbolic to influence the real, but you don't even understand what you're doing. You're just trying to be a bunch of nasty assholes to anyone else, including your own sister churches. Pfft. This proved to be the catalyst that encouraged different Sabbath covens to harness faith and direct it to their own path of enlightenment. That's the way. Enlightenment, bitch. Not delusion. This is so cool because it works so well. Like the Taoism, the Sabbath, the Enlightenment versus the delusional, the Christian, it works so well. Of all the groups, the Shepherds of Cain were the most ambitious and created the path of nocturnal redemption. The group's efforts, however, were actually born from the contending with the demon Metathiax, the source of malignancy that the Kainite sensed on the island. Frustrated by their inability to manipulate faith itself, Muscovans concentrated their efforts on corrupting various priests and ministers and rabbis. They made ghouls of altar boys and nuns, made them more attractive through the use of vicissitude. Oh, my brain. I think my brain's gonna melt. And then forced them to seduce influential religious figures. The Sabbath forced corrupt clergy to direct misguided worshippers to the Kainites' blood cult and held feast and sacrifice in church pulpits. Posing as priests, some Sabbath even used confessionals to discover hidden vices and then enticed mortals with their own sin. If you believe, I'm gonna make you go to hell because of your sins. You believe in that shit, then you will die by that shit. If the Sabbath held one thing over the Camarilla, it was misinformation. The Camarilla truly believed that the Sabbath was not only capable of manipulating and circumventing the faith that permeated Montreal, but that the sect was responsible for freakish events attributed to the unknown. See historical addendum at the end of this chapter. The Sabbath willingly fostered this reputation. Only pride prevented the Ventrue from asking the Tremere for help, and it was this arrogance that kept the Sabbath safe. British arrogance? What? They undermine the French. They tell them they're arrogant because they're actually standing up to them, and they are the ones that are actually quite arrogant in their bloody ways, huh? The wasps. Ooh, but I'm concerned. No, you're not concerned. You're manipulative and you're nasty and you're toxic. That's a difference. American dreams. The American Revolution of 1776 swept. Sorry, I have to check the time and the battery. Swept through the 13 colonies, and Canada was included in the Patriots' dream of emancipation from the British. Britain feared that Quebec would rebel during colonial unrest. Ratified the Quebec Act 2 years earlier. This established the boundaries of Quebec, reinstated French civil law while maintaining English criminal law, and guaranteed religious freedom. Montreal still had its share of sympathizer for the Continental Congress of Philadelphia, though. That following led to the belief that the city would fall with the revolutionaries. With the arrival of congressional troops, Montreal was abandoned by Governor Carleton, who deemed the city's defense incapable of withstanding invasion. General Montgomery, having landed at Nuns Island, chose not to invade Montreal out of fear of offending his French sympathizer. Instead, he maintained a small force in the city and continued on to Quebec City. It was left to Benjamin Franklin to woo the islanders into joining Congress, but Franklin's reception among the clergy left much to be desired. The Canadian initiative went badly for the Americans, who were eventually forced to retreat from Canada. Montreal was back in the care of the British Empire. If Strathcona resented the venture before, he hated this clan more than ever now. With the threat of colony cessation, the Primogen and Kamayla kindred of Montreal took steps to abandon the city in order to salvage their precious power. Many kindred joined Governor Carleton and his exodus from Montreal, and together they fled straight into a Sabbath trap. The shepherds sent in 3 nomadic packs: les voltigeurs, the acrobats, le gris fromage, the grey cheese, and bloodfoot, to ambush the to ambush the escaping entourage which had taken to the river. Hidden on the river shore, les voltigeurs fired on the caravan while les gris fromage and bloodfoot remained underwater and eviscerated the men they dragged off the boats. Of the 130 troops and 14 vampires escorting the governor, only Carleton, 5 of his men, and 3 kindred managed to escape. Strathcona was amongst the few Kamayla kindred left in Montreal. The other called him a lunatic for staying, and he himself expected to die. Instead, Strathcona was invited to join the Sabbath under the sponsorship of the shepherd. The Sabbath were very close to claiming the city openly, but needed to eliminate the Kamayla's presence and scare the sect enough to prevent its return. Outright warfare would not be sufficient, and the shepherds believed that the conversion of Strathcona could help the Kamayla make the decision. They simply needed to wait for the right time to act. Impressed by the Sabbath's sense of community and tired of Kamayla games, Strathcona joined the sect. When Kamayla forces did return to the city, Strathcona continued to pose as prince and as an adjudicator of venture will. Secretly, he helped plan a Sabbath coup. The deceiving eye. Several decades passed before the island was threatened again, but those few years of peace allowed Montreal to prosper. The newspaper that would eventually become the Gazette, Montreal's leading English newspaper, began publication in 1778. Multimillionaires such as McTavish, Molson, Drummond, Frobisher, and McGill created financial empires that put Montreal and its 25,000 inhabitants on the world's economic map. I don't know who Frobisher is. Neither McTavish, actually. The other names are familiar, but McTavish and Frobisher, I'll have to look into it. In 1793, the act of bringing new slaves into Lower Canada was declared illegal. Slavery itself was abolished in 1833 by British Parliament. Indoor plumbing was established in 1801. The first gas-powered streetlight was erected in 1815, and Montreal's police force was funded. Beyond the 1813 scare of American forces invading Quebec, these were progressive years. The Sabbath waited to take power, but that's not to say that they were idle. The shepherds had already continued. What? My gosh, I must be dyslexic. The shepherds had already assisted in the first Sabbath Inquisition, while various nomadic packs I think I don't know where the end of the chapter is, but I think I need to have a break. The shepherds had already assisted in the first Sabbath Inquisition, while various nomadic war pacts such as Les Voltigeurs and Bloodfoot remained in Montreal, awaiting the coming conflict. These two pacts, comprising French and native Sabbath, were created to help with city invasions and usually remained around until a job was done or they died. Les Voltigeurs and Bloodfoot were the first two war packs created in North America. The Widows was also formed during the Quiet Period. The pack quickly garnered a reputation for its brothel and the depravity of its customers. Pedophilia, geriatrophilia, necrophilia, coprophilia, bestiality, sadism, masochism, bondage, and numerous other desires were encouraged. Mortals addicted to one sexual fetish were forced to commit other deviant acts. While this was taxing on and often deadly too, the widow's staff patrons were made brothel was to replace the Cainites we were lost. Meanwhile, the city's Ventru fell into a comfortable pattern and dropped their guard. Sorry, I'm tired for whatever reason. Many had even been corrupted by the Sabbath and visited such places as the widow's brothel. Montreal was becoming Canada's major commercial center, and the Camarilla of the island enjoyed. Whoa. Why? Okay, I'm gonna finish there. The wealth they reaped. The cliquish and Sylly were already likened to an old boys' club, and few neonates were welcome into the city. Strathcona watched as his supposed brethren spent their nights managing their useless wealth or carousing under the roof of the Beaver Club, the Exchange Coffee House, or the Mansion House Hotel. The waiting time had come to an end. It was time for the Sabbath to act. Cool. One, two, three, 4, 5. Cool. I'll do those 5 pages to finish chapter 2 another day. Yeah, it's been an hour. Cool. I think I'm gonna leave it at that. Sorry for the ramble and the stuttering. Especially when it's mixing 2 different languages, it's not really the simplest. I'll have to do it again and again anyway, because first I want to get better, I want to improve, and I want to remember and actually take notes to be able to add some of those stuff in LFD. I'm playing with the shadows behind me. Ooh. Ooh. Huh. Kind of looks like a mask. That's pretty cool. Oh. Looks like I have a beard. Who's this bitch doing weird shadow games? It's me. Anyway, cool. See ya.